Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz. It's my pleasure to welcome you to Schwartz Report. This week, I want to talk about something that's about as fundamental as it gets. As I am recording this, we have 83 days left until we have an election. From my perspective, this election is not about Democrats and Republicans in the traditional sense. It is about democracy or autocracy. And I want to talk about it and why I think democracy is really the only choice. Because in those 83 days, we're going to hear a lot of stuff. But it really does get down to democracy or autocracy. And let me be clear what I mean by that. You look at this. Autocracy refers to a form of government in which a single individual holds absolute power and authority, making all the major decisions without significant input from citizens. The autocratic ruler typically has unchecked control over the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, leading to limited political freedoms and a lack of checks and balances. Democracy, in contrast, is a system of government in which power is vested in the people through elected representatives. It ensures citizens' participation in decision-making and provides mechanisms for accountability and the peaceful transfer of power. Democratic societies typically uphold principles of equality and justice and the protection of minority rights. Now, I went into all that because I want everybody to be clear about what I'm talking about. And from the social media and other things that I read, I don't think everybody is clear about the difference between autocracies and democracies. Partly, I think, because if you've lived in the United States all your life, you've never lived in anything but a democracy. But the truth is, as this chart shows you, democracies are in decline all over the world. Increasingly, authoritarian governments are taking power. Hungary is an example. Turkey is another example. Israel, I think, is a third example. So I want to talk about this because I see American democracy at risk. And apparently, I'm not alone. 72% of Americans say the U.S. used to be a good example of democracy, but it isn't anymore. And you can see in this chart, not only do Americans think this, but most other democratic countries think this. We are undergoing changes, have been undergoing changes. I think they started with the Reagan administration, and particularly with the change in the tax structure, which allowed the creation of a group of oligarch billionaires and millions of millionaires. We have the worst wealth inequality in the world. In the democratic world, particularly, it's notable. So, why do I feel the way that I do so strongly about this? Well, I think what really just changed the game for me was Project 25. Project 2025, which Trump is trying to run away from as fast as he can, is in fact a creation of the oligarchs who funded it and the staffers in the Trump administration who are mostly the authors of it. This is completely the creation of what used to be called the Republican Party. I think of it as the maggot party now. And it is scary because what they want to do is end American democracy. And they're doing this in a lot of ways. But one of them that I'm particularly concerned about as the election is coming up is the amount of violence and threats that are being aimed at state and local office holders. And you look at this chart here, 43% of state legislators have experienced threats. 18% of local office holders have experienced threats. 38% of state legislators reported that the amount of abuse they experience has increased since they first took office, while only 16% report that it has decreased. 29% of state legislators reported that the seriousness of the incidents has increased, while only 12% reported it has decreased. So we have a problem because the people who make up the structure of our democracy increasingly feel under threat. More than 40% of local office holders say they are less willing to run for re-election or higher office at the time they were surveyed, which was just a few months ago, because of abuse. For women, the rates of possible attrition are even higher. Approximately 20% of state office holders and 40% of local office holders acknowledged they were less willing to work on controversial topics due to abuse. They won't take on subjects like banning books in libraries or destroying the public school system or turning it into an indoctrination system. Because when you do things like that, then you get the responses from this far right group that wants to end American democracy. 53% of the state legislators believed that abuse had deterred their colleagues from taking on controversial topics. You see the kind of effect this is having on supporting fostering a well-functioning democracy. Approximately half of office holders reported reluctance to communicate via social media because of abuse. I've talked about this before, how social media is becoming dangerous, evil in many ways, because of misinformation and the abuse that people pour into it. 23% of state legislators said they were less likely to hold events in public because of abuse. So we're getting to a place where not only is our democracy under threat as some sort of theoretical situation, but because the people who actually make up the structure of democracy, the working people in the state and local levels, are getting completely freaked out about what is happening to them and the abuse that they are facing. Now, I want to get this down to the most basic things I can. I don't want to talk about political partisanship. I don't want to talk about political philosophies in an abstract sense. I want to talk about things like health and life expectancy and infant and maternal mortality. Because, as the National Library of Medicine reports in the papers that it maintains, the largest, most prestigious, most authentic body of science research about, particularly about medicine, that exists in the world. And what they say, and this is a quote: democracy, political rights, and civil liberties are politically modifiable variables that seem to be associated with health status. In our study, democracy showed a stronger and more significant association with indicators of health, life expectancy, infant mortality, maternal mortality, than indicators such as gross national product, total government expenditures, or inequality of income. When all of these variables were taken into account, the economic ones lost weight, thereby increasing, here's the message, the importance and the effect of democracy. So more than anything else, if you want to prosper, you want your children to prosper, you want to live in a state of well-being, you want to vote for a democracy. And I'm sorry to tell you, given Project 2025, this is not a vote about Democrats and Republicans, because there's only one party that's really supporting democracy, and that's the Democrats. They're not perfect. There are all kinds of problems. I understand all that. But they are working on democracy. And this party that used to be the Republican Party, but Republicans barely recognize it anymore, they aren't. Trump's very straightforward. He says he wants to be a dictator on the first day. They want to get rid of the Department of Education. They want you to be ill-educated, poorly educated. They want you to be easily manipulated by your fears and anxieties. So this is an election that is about democracy on the one hand and autocracy on the other. So let me give you, when I tell you that this affects your health, how long you're going to live, and your well-being, let me give you some actual facts. Look at this chart. What you see very clearly is that the greater the democracy, the healthier people will be. They will have longer life expectancies. They will have less infant mortality. They will have less maternal mortality. Right now, as our democracy is crumbling, we have the worst maternal mortality in the developed world. We have very poor health care, and it's the most expensive health care in the world. So with this election in 83 days, we get to pick whether we want to continue democracy and restore it, replenish it, whatever word you want, to make democracy meaningful to you, to make it important, to make it a priority in your vote. Whatever that word is, democracy is what's going to let you live longer. It's going to let your children live longer. It's going to make your wife happier, healthier, your husband happier and healthier. I can't overstress this. I mean, it is that fundamental. Let me show you this final slide. Look at this graph. There is a direct correlation between the level of democracy and life expectancy. So if you want to live longer, live healthier, live happier, you must vote Democratic, not because you're a Democrat, not because you have any particular political affiliation, but because one party is trying to dismantle democracy and the other is trying to maintain it. And hopefully we will work to improve it so that it becomes what it once was, the envy of the world. Are you prepared to do that? Are you prepared to foster well-being for yourself, your family, and your country? I hope so. You've got 83 days to think about this, and then you need to make a decision. And I hope you will join me in choosing democracy. Thank you.